Go ahead.
Mark, you ready?
I'm ready. All right, we're recording.
Call to order at 5 o'clock. Roll call. Joan?
Yep.
Mark?
Mark.
Jack? All board members are here. Approval of agenda.
Approved. Second.
Vote. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, then we have no public comments or you didn't get anything in the email regarding budget.
None of this topic, no.
Okay. So I guess first thing to do then is go right into the banking RFP timeline and bid list. So we turn that over to Pat.
Yep, this would be the year that we would issue an RFP. We usually do that every 5 years, and we have a number of financial institutions in Waunakee who would like to be considered. We went through an internet search, also looking around the map of our community to find the banking institutions that would be included on the list. And we'll be making phone contacts with them to find out who should receive the bid and the RFP information so that it goes to the right person. Sometimes it's not this local branch office, it'll be another location. So we're just developing the timeline for that and working on the document. You'll be able to see the document before it goes, and then the final bidder list with the rest of the information. The timeline as far as implementation, it will not be a July 1st start. As you can imagine, anytime we would be considering a change in financial institutions, it can bring about some anxiety on the part of everyone who has to handle money. So we want to make sure that we do this in the right order and the right sequence with enough communication to staff if it should be that our financial institution changes. So first we'll get the RFP out, interview people, and then start to develop a timeline so that any change, if it would happen, may not occur until after fall. So fall timeline, end of the year.
So at this time, we're strictly with one bank, correct?
Yes, at this time,
Yeah,
we
okay.
bank with one bank.
Thank you.
So that
So-
was
so
just
we
to give you
have a,
FYI.
A
Sorry.
decision by we'd vote on it in July or June.
I'll say it's kind of early in the process for me to say exactly when that would happen, but it would be soon around, I guess around that date is pretty close to when it might happen. I don't think it'll be sooner than June,
Okay.
but it shouldn't be later than August either. So in between a couple of 8-week time frame.
Any other questions on that?
Sounds good.
Audit RFP.
Audit RFP. So we received, we sent the RFP out to 9 firms and we received, 7 firms and we received 5 bids back. We checked the excellence, the references. We found excellent references for every firm. Generally, they're giving you references that will be favorable. When we look at the pricing, Whitley is the most economical. We checked their references, all the school districts there, and heard very positive things. And we would like to move Whitley forward to the board for approval for a number of reasons: the costing, the reputation of the firm, the references, and lastly, Wagner, who is currently our firm, had let us know that if Whitley was selected, they would transfer all their work papers and documents along with our depreciation schedules to Whitley. So we were pleased to see the pricing come in where it did, so that would ease that transition as well. That would be our hope, is that we would approve moving Whitley.
Any discussion? We have a motion. Motion, right? Yes.
I would move to forward with the firm.
Second.
Everybody in favor?
Um,
Aye.
We'll have it on next week's, on Monday's board meeting for the whole board to consider for that recommendation.
Okay. Move to the, we've got the current referendum balance and funding.
Yeah.
Walk us through that a little bit.
Right, what I provided was just the bottom line on the document, and we can provide more information on that, but it's basically account codes that mean something to me and may not mean as much to you when you're looking at just the number. But the bottom line on this is that our referendum funds of 2.127 million, to date, we've spent nearly 1.5, and we have about 200,000 still in encumbrances, leaving about 430 not yet spent out. So two things we haven't done yet is adjust any of the people perhaps that we have hired that were extra to keep class size down or to help service the district, like contact tracers.
I'm sorry. Is the unencumbered a way up remaining or the encumbered?
The unencumbered balance on the right hand.
So we have about 400,000, but not 125 or 195.
Correct,
Yeah,
yeah.
so almost 500,000.
Encumbered means they issued a purchase order to
That's what I
someone,
thought.
but we
Yeah,
haven't paid it
I
out
thought I
yet.
said it opposite.
But we haven't coded like some of our personnel costs.
Okay.
Haven't been coded to this.
Once
So
that's done, it'll drop
that's
down.
truly not the amount that's actually going to
Okay.
be there after we roll it forward.
Okay.
As far as the hard goods and the things that we've bought and the repair, the work on the HVAC, that's been paid for and done. And we wanted to see where that came in before we made any other adjustments. And Steve and LaDonna and I will have a call on Thursday and Friday and look at this and then identify who were the personnel that were hired with the intention of coding that to the referendum funds, so that we could get an idea and we can encumber those two so we can see what truly would be unspent, if anything, at the end of this year.
I think previously you saw a document from Steve that showed that this was pretty much all spent. And what this is just showing is what's actually per all the codes currently in our system. And now we have to go back and kind of catch up for those things that Steve was documenting on a separate spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So that will line up fairly closely.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that all of it's gone.
Yeah, but it's pretty close.
It's all accounted for.
That between the things that we put forth this year, from the facility enhancements to the cleaning pieces to the people, that's taken those dollars. But we'll, as Diane said, as they go back and officially code those, then we'll be able to determine kind of where this actually falls and then how the rest of our budget for this current year balances out.
And I would think that we should have a good summary of this for the April board meeting. And we'll do it when it's not just in numbers, if that'll be appreciated. We can categorize it by the departments where the money was segregated and what it was spent on, so that it could be something you can understand without knowing the entire DPI buffer codes.
So did you get any, I think last meeting we were saying that with the last stimulus bill, we had some potential funding come down.
That's the next agenda item, and that's shifted since we spoke last, based on the actions that were taking place in Madison at the Capitol.
Any other comment or discussion on this topic? Let's move to the next one.
So the information we have on ESSER, on the Word document, it explains ESSER 2. This is the ESSER 2 plan, and in text discusses how it was intended to be distributed across the school districts. The second document is just the page that shows what Waunakee was expected to receive. The 248,646 in the first column is the money we will receive. And the second column would have been any money if we hadn't reached $100,000. So if you read the words, the text that was provided, this first column is our initial allocation. The second column If we hadn't reached 100, they would have brought us up to 100. The third column was the dollar amount that was going to be distributed at $395 per pupil. So if your first two allocations hadn't brought you to $395 per pupil, that third column was going to make sure that across the three columns, you would have received $395. And that's been changed. So where we thought that we would be receiving about 1.7 million, now the distribution of the third column money will still have the 248, but the distribution of the third column money is being discussed as to how we will calculate the distribution of those dollars across the state. And it affects several districts who were looking to receive, or the initial plan was going to provide more funding than it is in the revised plan.
So these are the state funds that are available, not the federal funds, is that correct? Okay, so I've been trying to follow this through the newspapers. And from my understanding, the DPI is using a per student hour calculation to come up with this number. Was that dictated by the legislature then?
Yes.
Or the Joint Finance Committee when they reviewed it. So this document you see in front of you was the proposal of how they were going to do it. Then I believe it went to Joint Finance Committee, and through there it got changed to not distributing it to the 345 like 395 like Diane was saying, but to distribute that third column, the 1.4
Right.
million, based off of some calculation of hours of in-person instruction. So what I've heard from the folks at DPI on the meetings that I've been part of is that you're probably not going to know what number you're getting until late summer, early fall.
It's really interesting because the other stimulus is coming out. And the governor's got complete say on that versus the legislature, it looks like.
I think they're trying to determine how they're going to distribute that.
Right,
My understanding is that going to be through the Title I process or through some sort of process similar to what they're doing.
But would that come out even later then, since this early one has been?
So this is the second round of federal dollars. First number of CARES money, we got like 60 grand.
So we could be into September before we really finally find out.
Yes.
Right, and these dollars are good for like 2.5 years.
Till March of 2023.
They're out there for a while, so you can expend them for a bit. So it's just they don't know how they're gonna determine that third column yet. They just know the direction that they've been given as far as having to do it under some level of schools being in person.
But the 248 that's a guarantee.
I think so, yes, yes.
The other two numbers are in question.
Correct.
Well, just the other.
Just the one.
There's one of them.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So this is what's changed since the last time. The last time we were planning on the 1.7.
Right.
Now we can plan on the 248 and then whatever portion of the 1.4 per their formula, which they still need to determine.
And what kind of restrictions are on that? Is it pretty open as far as
Well,
where
that's part of the
allocated?
discussion is what does open mean and how are they going to count it? Because we have, that's part of the dialogue that I believe is occurring.
So even for the 248, what we can allocate those funds for are still in question? Or
No, that's in the text. If Rebecca, if you could go back to that document.
It's
If you-
quite wide open. Jack, there's very few restrictions on those funds.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And there is also in the document a leaning towards emphasis on instruction and making up for any learning losses that might have occurred. So
This could be for any of the type of things we've talked about with our referendum funds. It could also be for things that if you feel like you need to enhance instruction over the next few years, that you have some dollars to do that. So from what I've heard from my contacts at DPI, it's pretty wide open as far as how you define the use of that for your purposes.
So do you have a guess as to when that first column is available for the school districts in the fall, or is that going to be sooner than that?
It's my understanding that will be available
Either.
and can, I'm not positive it's available now, but they've given us codes and said it could cover expenses anytime after December. It has a timeline, not on this sheet, but from December, like 2020, all the way
Going
to
forward,
March
okay.
2023. So
Got
it crosses over multiple fiscal years, so planned out, it could be used for, in a couple of years to do the same thing. Or use at one time.
Okay, so we have no
No
need
action.
for discussion, questions? Move on to the budget parameters. Want to help us there, Diane?
Yes, I will walk you through it. What we were trying to provide you with was a range of revenue assumptions that we might see be the result of the final decisions, again, made at the legislative level. We have currently, in the current year, when we started for 2021, we had $179 as a revenue limit increase. We also received $742 per pupil on that per pupil categorical aid, it's called. And then our special ed percentage rate is 29. So I wanted you to see what happened this year so you could compare it to the years that are being proposed. The DPI proposal in the fall was $150 for the first year, $152 for the second year. I want everybody to keep in mind that whatever gets decided this year doesn't just affect us this year. It affects us for the next 2 years because of the biennial effects of the decisions. The DPI proposal had 750 and was looking to increase the special ed aid percentage on our aidable costs. And when we look at that, the revenue limit increase would be about 800,000. The special ed aid increase we're counting as a revenue source because actually what it is it requires less expense from Fund 10 when we get that revenue. So combining the 10 and 27 increases, it would be approximately $1,031,000. If we look at the governor's recent proposal, the parameters on that would be revenue limit increases $200, $204. So not that different, but the significant change would be would like us to get to the point where we have a 45% reimbursement on our aidable special ed costs. And that's significant because our aidable special ed costs are around $8 million. So anytime we increase a percentage on an $8 million aidable expenditure, that's a significant influx of aid revenue for this district. And let's call that the most optimistic view in column 2. When we, Steve wanted us to say, well, what if it's not even as high as the DPI proposal? What if things stay the same, but it's only 100 per pupil, which might go back a few years when we were receiving 75 or 100 or $150 per pupil. And that brings, when we only receive, I don't want to say only, but when we receive $100 per pupil, what happens is keeping the aid percentage at 29%, it doesn't add money to us. We have to understand that $100 per pupil out of that money has to cover the increase in costs in 27. So it has a double effect when the revenue limit per pupil goes down and the aid percentage doesn't increase. And the blended scenario is a mix of a range of what could happen if it is 150 and the aid percentage goes to 40%. That's not a proposal anyone has on the table right now, but it's something to show you how significant things can change based on different levels of revenue and special ed. And then we moved from there, as you can see, 1 million to 1,000,009. And somewhere a range in between, in fact, could even include lower amount like 300,000. When we go on to the expense assumptions, we first looked at fixed costs. Some of the things that we don't often keep in mind when we go from one year to the next in increases. In 18, and I didn't want to use 2021 as an example, and it's hard to use 1920 as an example for some of these because 1920 wasn't a normal year for these sorts of costs, and neither is 2021 going to be. So if we looked at 3% on transportation, utilities, supplies, and our property liability insurance, the effect is approximately 127. So you could say anywhere between 120 and maybe 150. The utilities increases, actually the 1.1 million is lower than it was the year before that because of all the energy savings initiatives that occurred here. So I was using already a lower number than had been an average in previous years. So just as a range of things, these are just a couple of items, some of the things that we see increased costs. You know, these are not project-based, but we see increased costs on these items year over year. Some are contractual, some are cost per unit. And the property liability insurance increases sometimes because we added improvements to our campuses, and sometimes because of the rate and loss ratios. What we haven't done is factored in any of the dollars from the referendum yet in above, right? Because there's not a plan for year 2, 3, 4, and 5 on how the money is going to be spent. We're just now analyzing how we used it this year and what would be the best use of next year. And then keep in mind a range of CPI and salary and fringe increases. The dollars that we present here is fiscal year 21 would be the end of this year and applying various percents and what the increase costs. So range from CPI at 1.23 is the CPI of 503 to 3% is 1.3. And every time you increase 0.5%, you're looking at about another 200,000.
And where do you take that CPI from? Is it July?
It's calendar year, the previous calendar year CPI.
I think it's 6 months prior to when your bargaining unit actually comes to. That was just posted on the state site as far as contracts that start July 1 have the 1.23% CPI number.
So it all depends upon where so if we bargain in fall,
No, it always stays the same. It'll say if your collective bargaining group runs a fiscal year from July 1 to December, then this is when that's so every month they'll give you a new CPI depending on when the collective bargaining group starts.
So does the number in column 1, that's the total salary for the entire staff?
Mhm.
Combined?
The salary and the FICA and
And the
WRS
benefits, yeah,
related to
all
that,
those,
just to the dollar amounts that
got it.
change with dollars of salary.
okay.
That's all 600 employees. That's not a teacher number. That's just straight
Right.
up everybody.
And then the next number is the point system.
No,
The
just,
staffing plans increase or not?
No,
That's just increase. Okay,
it's just take the whole dollar times a percent.
okay, got it.
there's no.
Oh, yeah,
that's-
I'm
that's-
sorry.
Yeah, that's just trying to give you.
Yeah.
What's your total dollar amount at the end?
I'm sorry. Yep, I get it.
Right,
So
when
is
you
this-
get those discussions about what would it look like for any specific group, you would find a percent, and of course it would be a different dollar, but
Yeah.
if you said, how much would it be to do XYZ, you'd have to tell us what that
Right,
looked
right.
like, and then we could
Got it.
provide you, but knowing that for every 0.5% we change is around 200,000 is a number to keep in the back of your mind.
Are we coming up on our insurance, health insurance this
We
year?
have. Next year is still a 0, and then it's the following
So
year that.
21, 22 is 0.
And
So will that begin this summer? Or next fall shopping, pricing?
That's a piece that'll be coming back to the insurance committee. I know Brian's had some conversations about wanting to kind of work with SSMD to extend that, and then what percentages those might have.
I would assume there's going to be an increase.
Most likely, once we get past that, and I don't want to speak off the top of my head what that is right now, but I mean, there's in the budget piece we're looking at for the next fiscal year, there's a 0% increase to our health insurance. And I think what you were just trying to show, Diane, is kind of what impact does that have as we look and plan for the future. Similarly, as you look at, when we look at like what's the total cost of an FTE of a teacher and a paraeducator, which are the bulk of our staff, to give you an idea of the salaries and benefits
Yep.
that go into them.
When you look at another thing, just in the back of your mind, as you're looking at proposals that would be increasing or decreasing staff, our average teacher cost with including the health insurance and other benefits is around 87, and the average para cost is 40. And we can give you average cost on other FTEs if you wanted. Those were the two that we calculated this week. And then looking at health insurance, looking at our costs and budget for fiscal year 21, that would be that year that ends in June. And the dental insurance ranges, if it's 2% or 5%, you can keep in the back of your mind what a 2% means to increasing health insurance, or 5% in dollars for health and dental.
But it's accurate. Your health insurance piece is just illustrative here. That's not actually part of what we're anticipating.
No, we're not anticipating that. But if it, as remember I said at the beginning, that this is a two-year budget that's going to be proposed at the state level. And if we're expecting in the second year to have 5% health insurance, any money we had on new dollars.
Randy, in your circles, or Diane, when you talk to other districts on health insurance, what does anybody else have a clinic like we have?
Some
Yeah.
prairie does, and that's a big one. I think.
Does anybody else have the 0% increase over 5 years? What are the other increases that you
Yeah,
see?
and the last time I had these conversations, they were between 5 and 10%, from what I remember. We haven't had that conversation since the whole COVID piece has gone on, but if you go prior to that, I believe they were between 5 and 10%. You had a few outliers that were really high. There were a few other districts that did get zeros through Dean for different reasons. I think Monroe had one, but they were, they have their clinic moved to a Dean and the Dean providers. There are some pieces around that. But I think generally the 5% seems to be pretty typical of what I was hearing in the previous years. And that'll be a piece that we'll be able to grab and start to see kind of what the new trends are. And Brian will be able to pull that out or find out from his people at the other districts.
I would add, there has been a great shift from the standard, copay, like $100 copay, $200 per family, and $5 prescription drug plans. I don't know a district who hasn't explored options and changes in coverage or clinic situations or some other kind of way to reduce costs. So is it this? Do other people do this? No, but many people use this as an example, and other areas it may take a few years to really analyze the full cost of, but all districts move towards some other way of reducing the cost for healthcare long-term. Not just year, it used to be year to year. Now it's more on a long-term decision basis.
Yeah, I think the conversation around on-site clinics is increasing amongst districts. I think we've seen, obviously in this region, Sun Prairie were kind of earlier adopters of that model, and I know that that's a discussion happening in other localities to see how that could fit within their system. And it's definitely a piece that I know Dean is looking to expand into other areas.
They see it, they must see a benefit to it.
So absolutely. I mean, I think we see the benefit here today with all just the partnerships with the vaccine piece. And that was mean, speaking to some of the dean folks today, that's a direct relation to the deep relationship over years that we've had with them to be able to start building that plan back in January. And that's part of why we were able to be here. And that's similar to where Sun Prairie was. That's how they kind of jumped forward there because of those relationships of continual monthly meetings around our clinic allowed us to precipitate these conversations into immediate needs that we've had in our district. In this case, the vaccine.
A couple of notes that I included on the bottom are that we haven't factored in, we haven't heard, we don't have the people who have submitted retirements. That is something that usually happens much later in the budget process. So we're not anticipating a huge savings and trying to budget based on something someone may or may not do yet. It does assume that food service will not require a transfer, that next year they'll be back in full operation and that will be serving meals and the food service will be operating again independently and not require a transfer. And the last assumption that's in here is that we're going to continue with the $509,000 Fund 41 levy, knowing that that is within the revenue cap. So we've already taken that into consideration up above. Don't worry that you have to take the capital projects levy out of the number up above. We've already taken that into consideration.
What do you need from us, Randy?
I think part of what we're looking at is some of your insight into, as we start planning forward, whoops, Rebecca, go back to that.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. You can stay right there. Is we have those different proposals on top. And I think what we're looking for is you have obviously a range of how we can start planning from the DPI, the governors. I truly don't think the lowest one is probably reality, but it's certainly an option that is up that you have to cost out, and then the blended scenario. We need to pick one to start and use as kind of a base for planning. And from my perspective, you probably take one that's more of a blended approach that and use that initially until you get insight that says that that's not what you follow.
And working with Steve the last years on this committee, he's always sort of taken that sort of middle position. Not the most conservative look at, not the most advanced, more of a reasonable look. I think he's undersold the estimate of population growth for students too. I mean, it says 60 maybe, but he might then go 39, but it doesn't go down to 20. And so given that, given his approach, I would think the blended does make the most sense to me. It keeps us sort of in the middle. It gets better grade. If it's less, we don't have to pay as much if we try to take one of the more optimistic ones.
I think with your special ed aid percentage, we're at 29%. That might be hard to get that higher than that.
And I think
for current situation.
the piece you're playing with are these two numbers. Is this going to be lower or is this going to be higher? And I think that's what you're really playing around with. I mean, we currently have 179. Will there be political reason to, if you just do what we did this year, you're at 179. And what we're actually proposing is you kind of plan it at 150. And then you're playing around with that special ed number. I think there will be a
The
movement.
special one is going up this year.
Special ed went up very, very small in increments, but it did go up. It used to be at 24 before this. thing.
Right, but I thought year two was supposed to go up another like 10
25,
points.
And then it kind of sparked its way forward. So you're right, that's a big jump. And then you're also looking at is 150 the right number, or will they stay at 179? All of those are. You're really taking a guess.
I think if you're looking at the crystal ball, 30% is probably realistic for the special ed. Just given the situation, 150 is probably reasonable. Does that make sense?
I given what I read last year with the direction, the special ed, I'd like us to be maybe 35%. I think 45 is, or 40 is shooting. You know, a little pie in the sky, but I think 35 is more reasonable.
You like kind of a piece that has the revenue limit at the 150.
Yep.
And special ed percentage at the 35, which is, I believe on your split is 217,000. Kind of create a different blended model with 150 and the 35 as opposed to 40.
Yep.
So a little bit more conservative of a piece, which would drop us.
You're looking at 150 and then 30.
150.
35.
150 and 35 would be the DPI proposal.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's okay, we've
I wasn't
looked at the
looking
numbers
across
a lot this week.
looking at the top too much. Yeah.
That makes sense. We all agree?
Place to start.
That's crystal ball, it's a starting point, then hopefully we
You
can
know,
expand
hopefully
it versus
it's
retract it. That'd be ideal.
And then as you read things and proposals that might change, you'll know that our budget, our initial budget drafts will be based on $150 and 35%.
Yep.
So if you see things that are finalized, you can move over across to say, oh, it is going to be 45%. How much different does that make to us?
Right.
Or if it's 200, where does that,
Right.
what does that mean to us? And knowing that so that you can respond. So we'll go with the DPI proposal that, as it was presented, and consider an $8, and across the board, it was $8 increase in the categorical aid. That's not a new $750, it's just $8 over the current rate. And we haven't seen any other, from any other dollar amount suggested, so I think it will be $750. Yep, and then we're gonna be meeting with Steve again to get that preliminary budget document ready for the board, and if we make some good progress on that, again, we'll have that ready in April with some of the other summaries of costs and departments.
So when we look at, just circling back to food service, we're planning that they're going to be back in operation. We should be able to start putting some reserves back into the food service account.
Over time, yes. I mean, I think particularly as you start looking at coming out of this year, and I think as Diane pointed out, we still have to kind of allocate where we're at with some of those referendum funds. But I think part of trying to then look at and then looking at what we get from those federal dollars, we could, let's just use food service for an example. We've supplemented a lot of food service costs over the course of the last year. You could target some of those dollars from any one of those buckets to kind of replenish back in and build up where we left off with, so that when you come out of it, you look back and you could be back where we were last March with food service. That's theoretical. So absolutely, you have that ability to kind of build up those pieces. There's some things we want to do with fund balance and some other areas that we have as some objectives. We can kind of look at those. I think we should also look at the impacts of some of these. And there's a reason they kind of have these federal COVID dollars over multiple years. It's because there's impacts over multiple years. So I think we kind of have to look at this in a multiple year sequence, and how do we continue to keep moving pieces forward positively for the district, but then an endpoint that we do have to find that sustainable piece that we've talked about in the future.
We go back for a second to that unencumbered amount. So once the staffing's in, you're saying there's probably zero left, or about 100,000 left?
I would say there's zero.
Zero, okay, all right.
We'll know that more specifically,
Yeah,
but
we'll
I
know
think
that
we're going to be close to have expended that.
And we've been closely monitoring transportation costs. And as we get back into full swing with maybe more riders on the bus, and parents and students feeling more comfortable and the limits on the bus, we may see whether or not there's some additional transportation costs that might need to be going there. But as it looks right now, he's just been very efficient with the routing and been able to keep our per day costs very close to the costs that we had last year on a given day. It might change as we go back, like I said, into full swing of operations with all students back all day, every day. But at this point, for this period of time where we are at this year, it's looking like we won't have incurred much higher transportation costs based on the way we're operating school.
Well, the reason I ask is it seems to me that with the ESSER funds, we're going to have some resources for expanding program next year that stem, for example, could be some of the online costs to get that moving forward, potential. I mean, but I guess my question is, if we want to expand programming between now and the end of the school year, either to do enrichment or remediation or expanded experience to help make up some of the loss that some of the kids feel they've had this year. The resources are gone from the referendum money. Can we short-term borrow somewhere and pay that off with anticipated funds?
Sure.
Versus saying, well, there's no money to do it.
So let's just say you went in, let's say we had no dollars, and speaking out of turn here, Diane, so you have to bring me back. But is if we expended everything within our budget and we had to go into fund balance to do that, you have the dollars from referendum.
Remaining
to
fund balance.
replenish the fund balance
Okay.
if you chose to do so.
And one of the things, we all talk about subs, right? Not enough subs. We now have permanent subs, right?
We have some of them. Yeah, we have I think 1 or 2 per building right now that are operating just to make sure that we're able to operate at the moment.
Is that something that would alleviate the problem going forward? Because we've got these people on board now, but would it make sense to have a discussion? Should we at least keep a couple? Because it seems like you're using, they're basically full-time employees, I would assume.
They're working under a long-term subcontract right now, which is basically a base pay without some of the other pieces of it. I think the part you're looking at right now is our sub-utilization has been relatively low. And I think part of it is that even looking at just all the precautions in schools at the moment, you're not having cold, upper respiratory flu. That's almost non-existent because of all of the distancing and cleanliness and mask wearing. So you've seen that go down. So we've actually had fewer absences. So I think all of these pieces kind of wrap together as far as how do those impact as you kind of go back to more of a normal operation. The piece that we looked at, we were running under normal circumstances, pre-COVID, we were probably running 30 subs a day. So that's the piece as you kind of look at is if I hire 1 sub, so I hire 6, I have an increased cost for these 6, but I still need 20 some more to cover the load over a general day.
Sure.
So does that make sense, or could I have hired them anyway and paid them at a lower cost? I don't know the answer to that. I think districts have tried different models. They've tried raising costs. They tried outsourcing it, which really hasn't yielded any better results. And some have tried these kind of making sure you have certain in-house subs that are there. If you need them. So I think it's a piece we can certainly talk about
The
again.
amazing thing is,
But it's the piece that we're looking at right now that's just unique with subs is that you have the risk of not being able to operate if we don't have the sub pool we used to. We have a number of people on our list, but not all of them want to work in COVID. So we're down to a smaller pool, but of that pool, we're not drawing from it as greatly as we were in the past, I think because of other factors within the school.
And pre-COVID, you can drive down any interstate for 500 miles. And you're gonna see be a sub, hiring subs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just a regional, I mean, it's a national level
It's a teacher.
issue. It's a teacher shortage thing. Yeah.
But we anticipate getting some subs back, but I think we can talk about that, Jack, and see is there merit to that or trying that and see what it looks like. But it does increase your cost for those individuals. It's just, is that gonna be enough to mitigate the challenges you have with the shortage? I'm not sure it does in regular times. Now,
If you were to not use them for the long-term jobs, the
Right.
ones we have, but, you know, the put out the fire jobs.
Right.
That might help a little bit,
That's
but
true. And that's where it would help.
Anything else for the good of the cause?
Do we want a motion on that? I guess I'm gonna-
Do you want a motion
As
on
far as
the-
what direction, which model you want us to build off of?
sure, I
That
will
way we at least are
we
clear
build
as
on the
what we're
DPI
planning.
model.
Second.
all in favor? Those
What I'll do
opposed?
is we'll use that from a budget planning model. I'm not looking to take that to the board, I don't think, unless you feel it needs to go there, but I think the direction of this committee gives us what we're planning on as we're putting forth the
Yep.
directions, so that we're out there.
Anything else for the good of the cause?
Do
Motion
you
to
do you
adjourn?
want to target the next meeting before we break, or don't, or is it too soon to do that?
We can do it at Monday's meeting.
Okay.
That's fine. That way I can.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Okay.